we'll be navigating the entrepreneurial journey, tackling common struggles, and prioritizing mental wellness.
Well, I'm Anna
Why don't you
Guerin.
start
Thank you so
first?
much for having me. I am the director of CAPS. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. CAPS stands for Counseling and Psychological Services. So all enrolled students at CalU have the ability to engage with a mental health clinician here at CAPS. All students get up to 8 free individual therapy sessions per academic year. And all students have the ability to do what are called urgent care or emergency appointments. So you can walk in or do a distance crisis call if you're in the state of California to help you problem solve any type of mental health concern that you are having. We also do relationship therapy, group therapy, we do consultations, and we do a lot of outreach as well. Our hours are usually 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. And for those of you that also don't know, CalU recently partnered with Timely Care, which is a telehealth-based support system, and that is 24/7 Talk Now features as well as scheduled counseling. So you can visit our website to find out more info on that as well.
Great. Thank you for telling us a bit about that. Kristen, would you like to chime in about your role at Hub 101 and what Hub 101 is?
Yeah, so I'm Kristen. I'm the program manager at Hub 101, which is Cal Lutheran's co-working space and startup incubator. For those of you who aren't familiar with those terms, it basically means we work with a lot of entrepreneurs. So young student entrepreneurs and also tech startups, small business owners, and entrepreneurs of all types. So I am bringing the perspective of the challenges that I see in the entrepreneurs that I work with. We are included in your tuition at Cal Lutheran. So please feel free to use the space for the students in the room as much as you'd like. Same with staff and faculty. The space is open, your key card gets you access, and it's like a big open plan office, and we're located at the Westlake Village Center.
Thank you, Kristen. And I'll just say I'm Jazzy Colbert. I'm a doer at Hub 101, which means a student worker. My major is interdisciplinary studies, specifically titled Psychology for Writing and Communicating. And I'm a senior and the owner of Jazzeries, which stands for Jazzy Accessories. And I'm excited to be moderating this webinar today. Okay, first off, you can just take a quick look at the topics we'll be covering. So we have the prevalence of mental health issues among entrepreneurs, entrepreneurial uncertainty and its impact on mental health, traits and behaviors that can lead to greater success, balancing self-confidence and humility while networking, ways that entrepreneurs can improve their mental health, and the future of entrepreneurship policy and community resources. First, I'll give a little bit of background about why entrepreneurs as a demographic are more prone to stress. So according to Tom Eisman, being an entrepreneur means, well, entrepreneurship is the pursuit of opportunity beyond resources controlled. So when an entrepreneur starts their own business based on a new idea for a product, modifying an existing product in a new way, or presenting that product to a new audience, the pursuit of one's goal for their new business is often constrained by time and limited resources. So there's a certain amount of risk involved for any investors. Pitching your opportunity as being worth the risk, despite a lack of tangible results, can be a stressful endeavor, especially for those who have to cut into their own resources to get a business off the ground. So when we look at specific demographics, there are 98,000 approximately entrepreneurs employed in the US. 41.5% are women and 58.5% are men. And of course, this categorization, this binary categorization is limited. And we hope that censuses and surveys become more inclusive. Notably, 10% of all entrepreneurs are LGBT, and the average age for an entrepreneur is 44. Specifically, breaking down ethnicities, we have white people coming in at 67% around. And because of that, the underrepresented communities often get, brushed to the side, or their needs are not met. And Speaking to gender inequalities, women earned 88% of what men earned in 2022. Speaking about entrepreneurs. Going into the psychological component of being an entrepreneur, we have the study in 2013 of applied psychology by Melissa S. Cardin. It was found that self-employed people experience greater stress than employees of outside organizations. Then they experience a positive impact of stress on income despite a negative impact on physical health. So just because entrepreneurship is self-directed, and sure, you may get like a boost in productivity from being stressed to a certain degree, that doesn't mean that being an entrepreneur is all sunshine and rainbows. A 2012 study in the Journal of Small Business and Entrepreneurship says that the self-employed reported higher job stress, burnout, health problems, and social participation than the organizationally employed. Furthermore, the self-employed spent significantly less time with family than the organizationally employed, both in Canadian and Pakistani samples. So what factors lead to this stress? We have role conflict or overload, issues related to business operations, and concerns from life outside the business. The effects of this are lower personal satisfaction and psychological well-being without proper coping skills. And here you can see the specific breakdowns of common disorders for entrepreneurs compared to non-entrepreneurs. We have depression at 30%, ADHD at 29%, addiction at 12%, and bipolar at 11%, greatly overshadowing the neurotypical or non-entrepreneur population samples. So like what I was saying earlier, when you're self-employed, you have more stress, a positive effect on that stress on income, and a negative effect on physical health. So my first question for our speakers today is, why is there such a prevalence of anxiety and other mental health issues among entrepreneurs?
Thank you for that intro, Jazzy. That was awesome. To set the scene a little bit from an entrepreneurship perspective, Steve Jobs once said that being an entrepreneur is like putting a dent in the universe, meaning it's really friggin' hard. And so there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of financial instability, financial uncertainty. It's hard to find talent, especially tech talent. You don't have a lot of cash runway. You're oftentimes having to fundraise, bootstrap with your own funds, or find alternative sources of funding. So there's a number of unique challenges that entrepreneurs face. Meeting investor expectations, if you have brought investors on board. And so all the while trying to maintain this like some sort of a work-life balance, right? And so these demands can take a really significant toll on entrepreneurs. To your stats, entrepreneurs are more likely to have history of depression and anxiety, addiction problems. And so here in the catch-22, and this is probably where Dr. Anna can share her thoughts too. The catch-22 is that mental health resources are kind of difficult to access. And that could be because of cost, or it could also be because of the fear of being vulnerable. So like if I seek out therapy, if I seek out mental health support, is that going to jeopardize my ability to fundraise? Is that going to jeopardize my ability to build a team? Is that going to jeopardize my ability to build my customers? And so there's kind of this catch-22 between perhaps recognizing that the mental health issues are there and not wanting or being hesitant to seeking help.
Thank you for that, Kristen. I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, and I think this is a very important topic, and it has been researched into some of the things that you've stated. Reaching out for help is a cost benefit analysis, right? Is this going to really help me in the long term? I have to take away time from my business or my idea to invest in myself. So sometimes that's where the catch-22 can be. And really looking at the amount of chronic stress and worry that can lead to anxiety disorders and depression in individuals that identify as entrepreneurs or small business owners. There's so many stressors that have to be dealt with on a daily basis. For example, like you noted, finances, there's so many categories of finances that people have to actively problem solve for the worst case scenario, lack of control of the market or economy. Also, this really internal and external pressure to succeed. And what does it mean if you don't succeed? So your identity sometimes being tied to an outcome, and how can that impact your view of yourself? For example, I fail at this business. What does that mean about me? But also within that, there's this notion that, you know, there's a lot of creativity and thinking outside of the box when you're an entrepreneur or small business owner, and that sometimes can collide with maybe this uncertainty of starting a business, and then leading to things like imposter syndrome, or this idea of feeling like a fake. So always having to continually prove yourself in certain arenas can be very stressful, and it can impact overall well-being, physical health, mental health, spiritual health.
Thank you for that insight. I think that was very well said, because especially since being an entrepreneur is in a lot of senses self-directed, I can see how one's worth could be easily mistaken for their productivity. So thank you for that. Next question for both of you: how have you seen entrepreneurs' mental health be impacted amidst all these sources of uncertainty that come with owning and operating a small business?
So I mentioned I'm a program manager. Maybe some of you are like, what the heck does that mean? So I work with entrepreneurs in terms of really hands-on with their businesses. So they come to me sometimes with an idea and want to work through an idea. Sometimes they come to me with revenue generating, but they're stuck. Maybe they have less than 100 users and they're trying to grow their customers. Maybe they're trying to raise funds. So that's how I typically interact with entrepreneurs, is on the business side. And I see this, to answer your question, I see burnout a lot. I see entrepreneurs who are really, really on it, and then they'll disappear. And I think it's because they are genuinely burnt out. I think they go full force and they don't quite know how to maintain and sustain that velocity of work ethic. I also see a lot of like avoidant behaviors in entrepreneurs in terms of a hesitancy to recognize that they might be struggling with mental health issues. I see like a tough it up, stiff upper lip, you'll get through this. This is just a season. There's worse things, you know, if you're not going to do this, no one else is, you know, those types of phrases that we can say to ourselves. I see a lot of that in entrepreneurs I work with. So kind of tough it out. Other people have done this and been successful. Why can't you? So that's how I see it show up in the entrepreneurs I specifically work with. A lot of that like hustle culture can come out here. So like hustle grind 24/7. And that's thankfully shifted since the 2010s when hustle culture in Silicon Valley was so prevalent. We've seen kind of a decline in that now, and we see more of these, you know, big entrepreneurs talking more about work-life balance. But I still do see that hustle culture, tough mentality still today.
Thank you. Yeah, I can definitely relate to having trouble balancing the need for rest and validating that I'm struggling, versus, you know, not getting lost in those emotions or ruminating to keep me from getting back to being productive. So I definitely think that's a difficult balance, and self-compassion is really important, and accountability when you do need help.
Yeah, and I think, you know, chronic stress in general, and even lack of social support, whatever that looks like for the individual, will inevitably impact, you know, their overall wellness, whether that's their physical health, their feelings, their emotions, their spiritual health. And then sometimes individuals will cope maybe with tools that are not so adaptive, for example, like substances, increasing caffeine, use of alcohol, other things that could impact your balance throughout the day. I've, you know, also seen, you know, across different domains, people overcompensating. So working 20, 21 hours a day to prove their worth. And then they lose touch with their passions, their friends, their family, kind of the values that brought them into this arena as well. And also to note that, you know, some entrepreneurs and small business owners have to manage judgment from maybe greater society of what it means to be an entrepreneur or small business owner. And then, sometimes there's this even intersecting experience of, are you an entrepreneur? Are you a first generation person in the United States? Do you, what does it mean to be that, and how do you have to prove yourself? So I think all of that can really impact someone's ability to function on a day-to-day basis. So it's important to, I think, as you can, step back and find community and support.
I think that you mentioned something really interesting, which is kind of like that intersectionality, right? Of entrepreneurs who also might be a person of color, or maybe they don't have access to resources that specifically like white entrepreneurs might have. When we look at like the landscape of entrepreneurship in terms of support, and I know there's gonna be a question coming up somewhere around here about how we support entrepreneurs, but how this can show up, especially in underrepresented founders, looks different than how it does for like white founders, for example, who may have access to networks and resources that are more easily at their disposal. And so thank you, Dr. Anna, for bringing that up. It can look different depending on who you are as a human.
Definitely. Yeah. I have been learning in social psychology lately about how stereotype threat for underrepresented communities is definitely a big factor in leading to imposter syndrome. Because if you're afraid of what others think of you based on your group membership, it has been shown to directly impact levels of success as an entrepreneur.
It's interesting.
So now a little more info about confident body language, its benefits, its limitations. According to a psychological science study, there are benefits of power posing to change your brain chemistry in stressful social situations, to prep yourself and to contribute to greater self-confidence. There are actual proven poses to do in order to make yourself prep for a social situation that's highly stressful. And it's also been shown that looking confident leads to more positive perceptions of you, making you more likely to succeed, because if people's perceptions of you are good, if you're commanding attention as someone who's confident, you're likely to be given more opportunities. That also relates to the ability to maintain eye contact, and that leads to success when socially appropriate. Too much eye contact is also detrimental, as some of you may have experienced, where someone's feeling threatened on the opposite side of it. But the tricky part of this is cultural differences in requirements for eye contact, norms where, looking at someone in the eye is seen as disrespectful to an elder, or even being on the autism spectrum can lead to less opportunity for entrepreneurs, because if you're not able to practice those norms or have difficulty understanding them, people can often not be tolerant of that. So society needs to accept those differences. And this is just all aspects of the issue to be aware of, like the nature of having this inherently versus, some habits that we can form to practice this. So having to do with that, what are some traits that facilitate success amongst entrepreneurs? How can people who are not confident in their business abilities grow in that way?
I'm actually really curious about this. Dr. Anna, the limitations, like where are the limitations of something like this? So where affirmations and confident body language, is there data, or is it kind of a case by case how far this can get someone?
I think, if anybody's open, they can practice confident body language, but always checking into their own values. Because I think if you're not following what is inherently right for you, it's not going to make the process authentic, and it can actually end up harming your mental health more than supporting it. So I think working through what are your values, what are you able to do, what are you wanting to do, practicing that with people that you care about and then can give you feedback. But I also think that there's this almost like global idea that everybody needs to fit in a box and we all need to act in a certain way. And I think just an understanding and acceptance that that is not the case. So I think the acceptance process of that is helpful for some individuals, whatever they're dealing with.
Very well said. And related to that, I actually have a Psychology Today article reference here called Why Positive Affirmations Can Do More Harm Than Good. And it's talking about how affirmations having to do with I am phrasing, like I'm safe, I'm successful, are often counterproductive compared to I can affirmations, such as I can do this, I believe I can get there. Because if you don't validate the present of where you're at now, there can be a discrepancy between the actual self and the ought self, as they call it, which is interesting how the affirmations can just make you mad at yourself if you're not what you're saying yet. So it's important to validate where you're at and also trust yourself and your ability to get there.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, Jazzy. I think anything that people try to help reduce stress, anxiety, or increase confidence, it's not everything's like a one size fits all approach. So really practicing different techniques or skills. And I think any venture we take on, like reminding ourselves that, for example, if you start a new business, budgeting in that mistakes is part of the learning process, and like understanding that, you know, making a mistake is not always quote bad or wrong. It may feel horrible, but reframing that mistake does not essentially make you who you are. And examples I like to give is like, do we fault children for falling down when they're learning how to walk? No, we cheer them on and we say, great job, you're doing it. Or do we gasp with judgment when a little kid is learning to pronounce new words? No, we cheer them on. So I think internalizing that mistakes will happen. How do you tolerate the stress when mistakes happen? And finding also people around you that are going to support you in the way that you want to be supported, so you're not alone in this venture.
I really like that reframing. Thank you.
That was excellent. I love that comparison. I actually think I might adopt that when talking to my entrepreneurs. That's great.
Great. Next question. What are some other ways you have seen entrepreneurs embody a healthy amount of confidence? You know, balancing humility versus, self-esteem.
Confidence is a good one. It's and Dr. Anna like touched on this already, but I think it's a balance, right? It's finding the balance within yourself of being confident in what you know and confident in what you're doing, and then also having the perhaps it's just not leading with your ego. Perhaps it's having humility. Perhaps maybe even a better way to frame that would be being confident in who you are and still being curious. So still having an open mind, still being willing to, maybe I don't have this right. What if there's a better way to do this? So still being open to asking those questions while also being confident in who you are. And I think it goes back to what Dr. Anna was saying about finding your values and what's important to you. I think that confidence is definitely a balance between being secure in who you are and also still being curious to what you may not know.
I really like that. I think that when it comes to ego, some people in the business space I've met, it limits them because they have tunnel vision to their own thinking, their own beliefs, and they're not able to grow like from a success standpoint because, you know, there's a certain amount of learning involved in messing up and being able to admit you messed up.
And you can, so you just mentioned you can see through it, right? If you can see through it, your customers can see through it, investors can see through it. And so it's only, to your point, doing you harm to not take so one of the things when I work with entrepreneurs that they look for when they're investing in founders, a coachable person, meaning they're really good at what they do. They're experts in their product. They're experts in what the business that they're building. And also they are open to being coached. They're open to getting feedback. They're open to learning from people who may have done this before or may have more experience than them. And so it's kind of like an and statement. And I think that's kind of the key here.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you, Kristen.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I appreciate the idea of being open to feedback, because I think that's how everyone grows. And, you know, confident individuals, they appreciate their own abilities, but they can take in feedback and integrate and grow. And I can't remember who had this quote, but there's nothing constant but change. So like everything's changing. So being open to the idea of that something will change and integrating that into your role and will help build your confidence. And also really understanding your needs and balancing your needs and compromise where needed. And Jazzy sent me a blog on LinkedIn. It was from, I believe, Joanne Zook, really talking about people pleasing. And it's a really good read if you have time to read it. And it talks about how people pleasing can actually hurt your business because you're not sticking to your values and your boundaries. And there's this idea that, I don't know, the customer is always right. And this desire to manage everyone else's needs. And then sometimes you forget about your own needs. So I thought that was a really interesting read. And I appreciate you sending that to me. And I think it is related to confidence as well.
Next question. What are some other ways you have seen entrepreneurs improve or protect their mental health that may be beneficial to those attending?
From again, the business perspective, right? I find that there's a lot of value in camaraderie. So when I oftentimes have founders come to me and say, hey, it's taken me 4 months to get to this prototype launched. Is that normal? Or man, it's really hard finding tech talent right now. Are others struggling too? And not necessarily to compare themselves against someone, but to kind of understand the landscape of, am I the only one struggling or are other people struggling too? And what are those struggles? And can we kind of help each other out? So I have seen success in entrepreneurs dealing with their mental health, dealing with specific challenges, I should say, specific business challenges by creating like a support circle of other entrepreneurs. And Matthew Donnelly on the call created something actually at Hub 101 called WHAM, weekly accountability meetings. And I've seen this firsthand in those meetings. It's a weekly meeting where entrepreneurs get together and they share what they're working on, what they're struggling with. The group asks how they can help. And it's really been fruitful for all of the entrepreneurs to not only just share, because sometimes that's a lot of what it is too. And I'm sure there's research behind this that's outside of my wheelhouse, but I'm sure there's research that supports that even by acknowledging something and recognizing something, you're already doing some of the work, right? And so it's a place where you can recognize and then also seek help. And it's been a really awesome group.
Thanks for mentioning that. I've definitely found the WHAM meetings to be super helpful. And I feel that an important social psychology theory to bring up is upward versus downward comparisons when it comes to, seeing others who are quote unquote doing better than us. Like a certain amount of awareness or acceptance of, yeah, maybe this person is further along in their journey than me, can be helpful, but in an extreme degree, it can become like an unhealthy amount of self-criticism of this person is so much better at X, Y, and Z, and I'll never get there. Same with downward comparisons. That plays into the ego when taken to an extreme of looking at someone who's doing worse than you to feel better about yourself.
Ooh, that's a good one. That's a common one.
Yeah, and I would, think about when anyone is creating a business plan to also create a wellness plan for yourself. And that could look however you want it to look, but just reminding yourself of what are the things that are important to you? How do you know when you're out of balance? Is there anyone that can help you stay accountable for your balance? And it can even be as basic as reminding yourself, like, I need to eat, I need to drink water, I need to get some sunshine every day, I need to connect with a loved one on a daily basis for at least 5 minutes. And that's how I know I feel balanced. And if I'm not doing those things, then what can we do to get back in balance?
I love that so much. I wrote that down. That's like, I think even like one of those like tweetable moments. Like if we're in a conference and we were in like on stage, I feel like that'd be like the tweetable quote. Creating a business plan, also create a wellness plan. I think that's a fantastic idea.
That's a really good tip. Yeah. What could the future of entrepreneurship policy look like? Like, what direction is it moving towards?
This is this is a very big question. I think when I look at like our local community, which might be like kind of helpful to kind of scale it down to our local community,
Mhm.
I see the future of entrepreneurship. We're trying to work with a lot more students and get resource access to youth who may not otherwise have access, specifically high school and younger. So we're doing a lot of work with, again, like young entrepreneurs or the entrepreneurially minded, entrepreneurially curious groups. Oftentimes you hear, I think you even had it, the average age of an entrepreneur is 44, right? I think that was
Mhm.
what one of your openings data points. And we oftentimes don't come across a lot of these resources. We don't have maybe it's the financial safety net, or we don't have the risk appetite or whatever that might be until we're older. And so it's kind of trying to teach younger generations, not necessarily to go out and launch a business, but how to be entrepreneurially minded and how to challenge a status quo, how to think outside the box and think creatively and problem solve in creative and innovative ways. Um, and so in our community locally, that's what we're trying to do more of.
That reminds me of something you told me, Kristen, that maybe you can speak on about the importance of inclusivity, not just for demographic wise, but also inclusivity of the word entrepreneur,
Mm.
because a
You-
lot of people don't like to call themselves that, right?
So, I thought about this on that slide you had when it said 67% of entrepreneurs, something like that, are white. And then it was like, I think it was African Americans, 6%, Latino, 15%, something like that.
Mm.
And yeah, oftentimes the word entrepreneur is intimidating. And there was a research study I participated in, I think it was last year or the year before, that concluded specifically the Latinx, but Latina communities don't identify with the word entrepreneur because they're oftentimes entrepreneurs out of necessity. They need to start a business in order to provide for their families. And so they don't associate with that word. So I was curious, the numbers that you found, if it was people identifying as entrepreneurs or kind of what the nuance was there. Because yeah, not everyone identifies as an entrepreneur. They say I launched a business because I had to care for my family. Right. And so
Yeah. I
even
believe
that word is
that was just the people who reported being entrepreneurs. So you're right, there's a limitation in that data for people being like, oh, it's just something that I needed to do. And yet I really appreciate you bringing that up.
and side hustles and small businesses. Some people don't often think that those are businesses or like real or deserve the same attention that the Amazons and Metas and Netflixes of the world get. And
Mhm.
there's some really fantastic small businesses, nonprofits, doing incredible things. And those founders just may not identify in the same way.
I think also under this question I had listed, there are several studies that I had linked about the importance of improving diversity and inclusion
Mm.
training in the workplace. Would either of you like to speak on that? If not, I can give a quick blurb.
Yeah, I think it's very important to either increase research or understand the landscape of DEIJ training in the workplace or even in secondary schools to understand power and privilege and how that could impact any sector, but especially when you think about the sector of small business owners, entrepreneurship, um, maybe some of the privileges or non-privileges that people may experience and how that essentially policy is created by people with the loudest voice or like more power, and how can you like really step back to understand how can we advocate for I guess a domain that is more open to ideas from different groups or different experiences, and within that reducing the stigma of mental health, help-seeking behaviors, however that may look, and really integrating into that, like a path forward for how that may look.
I think that I just Googled it because to see if there was updated from 2023, but I couldn't find it fast enough. So I have 2022 data, that 1% of all venture capital funding went to Black founders, and 2% went to women founders. So out of $216 billion in 2022, less than 2 billion went to like underrepresented groups. And so when you absolutely like want to emphasize what Dr. Anna said, when you look at the landscape of entrepreneurship, how can we that's something that needs to be like shaken up, like blown up, really. And it comes, one of like the nuances there is, again, access to resources. Venture capitalists in particular invest in patterns. So if something does well, they're going to invest in more businesses like that. If historically they're investing in white founders, SaaS companies, for example, they're going to continue to do more of that. And so we need more of the breaking of the status quo, and kind of more of that curiosity piece, right? That like open to what we may not know yet, as I'm speaking as a venture capitalist, which I'm not. But a lot of it comes down to, again, access to those rooms, access to those spaces. And historically, underrepresented founders don't get access. And then when they do, they don't meet the pattern of the portfolio that investors have. And so, yes, we might be able to get to the table, but then what happens after that? And so I think there's a lot of conversations that have to take place in that space in particular.
Thank you. Yeah, that's got me thinking about some of the studies I looked into for this question were talking about how diversity training is often used as like a prefix to employment that's, sped through the videos because the videos of instruction are so long, and it's treated as an afterthought that's never talked about again in the workplace environment itself. So it's all about creating a lifestyle of inclusion, not just ticking a box. And I think studies lately have been showing that Black women, especially, their emotional needs are not believed, specifically in the medical sphere when it comes to mental health and physical health. So it's got me thinking whether that ties in to like creative ideas from underrepresented communities not being taken as seriously. Because even if someone is wanting like a diversity hire or someone to invest in from a certain group, if that same idea was coming from a white mouth, maybe it would be taken more seriously.
I think you ask good questions.
Thank you.
There are some amazing groups. Backstage Capital, founded by Arlen Hamilton, is one of them. She's a rock star. So there are funds, and specifically, I just want to kind of go back to the entrepreneurship piece, because this is what we need to see more of to shake things up. There are funds that are opening that are for underrepresented groups, so specifically people of color, specifically LGBTQ plus communities, and founders who identify with those groups. And so I think in order to see change, kind of going back to like your policy question previously, we need to see more of that. Now, what does that mean? We need to see more of. I think that's the big question.
Yeah, that's the big question for sure. Thank you for touching on that. Last question for you both before we open it up to a quick Q&A. What are some resources that entrepreneurs can use for support now?
That's a great question, Jazzy. And I think for any student entrepreneur that's part of CLU, if you're interested in mental health services at CAPS, feel free to give us a call, or even pastoral care on campus, or engagement through student life in certain groups that can help support you and create that social circle. Even if you're an alumni of CLU, you can give us a call and we can consult and help connect you to a mental health professional in the community. But I think there's a lot of different options, and I encourage anyone that has a question to always reach out to me. And it doesn't always have to be a mental health support. It can be a pastoral care support. It could be a support group. It could be a social activity that helps bring you the validation and being seen in what you're doing on a daily basis.
Dr. Anna, do you so we're at Hub 101, which is the Westlake Village campus, and our neighbors are community counseling. Do you work with community counseling or refer to community counseling, anyone?
Yes, we have referred to community counseling there, a community clinic in Westlake and also Oxnard. So any member of the community, including CLU students, can call and schedule an intake appointment to be screened. It's usually sliding scale, which means they take payment based on what you can pay. And it's longer term therapy, meaning, for example, CAPS, you only get 8 sessions per academic year, just based on the staffing that we have. At the community counseling center, they have different options. They also have groups. They have a dialectical behavior therapy track, which really teaches individuals about emotion regulation and just stress tolerance. So a lot of different options. I would suggest checking it out if you're interested.
Going back to the sliding scale, I'm not super familiar with community counseling's offerings, but I have had a couple members come and say that they were able to pay like $10 for the counseling services over there. And that's right next to us at Hub 101. So just want to emphasize that for those of you who may not be within the Cal Lutheran community, that extends beyond, like, you don't have to be an enrolled student or anything like that.
Yeah, that's important. Thank you.
I think I mentioned WHAM. I think WHAM is one of the great programs we have at Hub 101 specifically for support right now. So I think WHAM is a great one for the entrepreneurs in the room. And even if you're curious, like what the heck that is, it's every Monday from 2 to 3. It's in person at Hub 101, but also online. There's an online option. So if you just kind of want to poke your head in and see what it's all about, feel free. I'll put my email in the chat. Feel free to email me. I would say email Matt, but Matt is relocated to Seattle. And so I'll put my email in the chat. And thanks again to Matt for starting that and launching that and getting it off the ground. But I think that's a really good start to kind of introing to the community and then figuring out how we might be able to support from there from a business perspective.
Great. Thank you so much. I think if there are no further points to add, I'm going to just go into the Q&A because we have a couple questions here. If you don't want to ask your question in the public chat, you can feel free to email us directly. While my experience is more personal when it comes to having a business, you know, Kristen's an expert when it comes to the business side, and Dr. Guerin is more on the psychological side. So hopefully this will provide you with some good outreach if you need it. To Matt's comment, the average age of an entrepreneur is 44. That is older than what I would say startup culture would have most people believe. And yeah, this was surprising to me too. I read another study talking about how, especially for like middle-aged or just before middle-aged women, you have a tendency for people to pursue passion projects, maybe after they've had a traditional career, being employed for someone else. So a lot of times, because it's a side thing, and like demographically, they may be more likely to be taking care of kids, in a lot of places in the world. They may just consider it, like Kristen was saying, a side hustle, and don't call themselves entrepreneurs. But upon observing like business behaviors, I think that's what plays into the statistic to make that average so high.
I also think, yeah, I think it's entrepreneurship is kind of like a broad term. Within the world of entrepreneurship, we have like kind of distinctions to kind of help perhaps categorize different founders. So there's like the startup founders, which is what Matt kind of asked secondary there, which is like the tech startups. So think Amazon, Meta, Facebook, like the innovation driven startup. And then we have the small, medium-sized business entrepreneur. Think opening a local franchise or launching a clothing brand, a model that you can probably get a loan for because it's less risky than a tech innovative type of business model. I wonder, Jazzy, if in that statistic we're lumping those together. I wonder if we were to peel them apart, if there would be difference in age.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I need to look into that further. That's a really good point. Thank you. And to the other question from Matt, do you have a number for the average age of a startup founder? I just Googled it. According to a LinkedIn article citing a Harvard study, the average age is 35 to 45 years. So that brings it down a little bit. Follow up.
I also wonder if the because to Matt's point, it is we're made to believe that all like the tech founders are like 20-year-old college bros, right? So I wonder if there's some sort of media spotlight that also kind of skews our perceptions of that. Like I do wonder, perhaps it is
Yeah.
35 to 44 or 44 across the board and even with tech. But the media doesn't highlight those stories.
Yeah, that's a good point. There may be some ageism at play there in terms of what's shiny and new. Like we always hear stories of 30 under 30. Like why is it considered more admirable to start a business according to society
Ooh.
when you're younger? Like I personally admire, maybe this goes against what society's norm is, but I personally admire when people go back to school for business degrees, like when they're older. And like to me, that shows more dedication to one's passion, one's new career path versus someone who's just out of high school and is kind of there because they're supposed to be.
Yeah, and I think it's hard to say because it's all relative to like individual circumstance. I do
Yeah.
think it's very interesting what you said, the 30 under 30, and how we
Mhm.
kind of we kind of amplify and celebrate the successes under a certain age. And I for sure agree that there's some ageism there. It's very interesting.
Thank you. Yeah. To Matt's question, is there a difference in the type of stress younger versus older entrepreneurs face? And yes, there was a study on that, talking about like the variations in types of stress for older versus younger, specifically highlighting how older entrepreneurs, the financial stress has some nuance in how it affects the family system. Like overall, yes, it can lead to more marital problems because of the stress of being a self-starter, having your own small business. But the nuance in relying in a family for support, like demographically, maybe one's more likely to have a new family unit of husband, wife, partner, and kid as they're older. The support of having a close network is positive, but if you are relying on family for financial, like to prop up your business with borrowing from family members, that's another source of stress that maybe younger people don't have as much access to just because there's more family to get money from as the family system expands.
That one's outside my wheelhouse. I would defer to the psychologists in terms of
I
differentiating stress.
I haven't seen the data on that. Anecdotally, I can guess that there would be different types of stressors, but then individually, how does each person manage stress, I guess is the question. I mean, we could assume that as you experience stress, as you get older, you practice it more, but that doesn't always mean that you're reducing stress because more stressors can come in. But I think it just points to that no matter, I guess, what age, stressors could happen. And if you don't have the social support system, it can turn into depression, anxiety, and other, disrupted relationships like Jazzy was saying. But that's a really good research study for anybody that's looking to do one.
And Jazzy had some good articles.
Mhm.
I was trying to like just like leave some sort of like, I don't know, encouragement to people who might be watching this or who are in the room, which is that you don't have to have it all figured out as an entrepreneur. I've worked with literally thousands of entrepreneurs at this point. Not one person has it all figured out in every aspect of their business. So I think it's normal to feel that way, validating that you're not alone in this. And then also I want to really, really normalize seeking help, whatever that looks like to you. If that's a professional, and I'm going to step back there and let Dr. Anna chime in, but whether it be a professional or a startup support group or whatever that is, like you don't win an award in life for not asking for help. Like you don't get a badge at the end of life. Like you didn't have to ask for help. Good job. And so I want it to be more normal to say, hey, right now I'm going through a really hard time. I don't really actually really need anything. I just need someone to listen. Or right now I'm going through a really hard time. I think I need help in this area. And I want that to be more normal to ask for help because it's not like we're wearing a badge of honor otherwise.
I really like that. Thank you for highlighting that as like, I think that's an important closing message for our viewers, to normalize asking for help for sure. Dr. Anna, would you like to chime in further about that point? Or are you all ready
Oh,
to?
yes, I completely agree. Asking for help when you feel like you can use some support. And like Kristen said, support in what it looks like for you. It doesn't always have to be a mental health professional. Some cultures or families are not open to mental health professionals, and that's okay. It could be a religious leader, pastoral counseling, peer support can be very helpful. There's this term called bearing witness. It's essentially, you know, if you share with someone about like your successes and your struggles and you feel validated, that can sometimes help lift some of the burden of what you're going through. So really finding that support in whatever it looks like for you, and also remembering all of the positive traits and characteristics of being an entrepreneur. And, you know, I tell clients sometimes, you know, we all have to take risks, and you're taking risks and you're being vulnerable and taking a risk in doing this. So remember that along this journey.
Amazing. Yeah, I totally agree. I think my closing note will be that for those who don't have access to therapy for financial reasons or just lack of access in your community, I found something that I guess ties me over in periods where I'm waiting to seek a higher level of care from a therapist or in between therapists. You know, the online advocacy community has been a godsend for me, not for diagnosis purposes, but because they're obviously not qualified for that, but just to hear the validation of, you know, I see you, I have experienced a similar thing, and you're not alone. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to those tuning in, and looking forward to this being up for others to access. And yeah, I feel like this was a really helpful conversation.
Well, thank you, Jazzy, for putting together the slide deck and all your work on this. Much appreciated.
Yeah, you did a great job, Jazzy.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you everyone
Nice.
for joining us. Dr. Anna shared some awesome resources from CAPS. Hub 101 is also a resource. Feel free to reach out. And with that, we will conclude and say farewell. See you at the next one.
Farewell. Bye-bye. Thank you.